Hey everybody. So today we're going to be taking a look at one of the scenes in Blender that I made recently. It's called The Anomaly, and you can check it out on my Instagram and on my Reddit. But today I'm going to be talking about an important concept that a lot of beginners in Blender don't really seem to grasp, or they don't seem to use it to its fullest. And of course I'm talking about vegetation, the use of vegetation in your scenes, as well as where to get good assets for flora to make your scene look a little bit better than it already is. So as you can see here, I have the blend file for the anomaly opened up here, and as you can see, there is one focal object in the middle with these cubes. However, there's also quite a lot of vegetation in the scene, and when I get into rendered view in a second here, you're going to understand why. So as you can see, this is the full scene before it's rendered and edited in Photoshop, but as you can see, the scene is quite full. You have a stone-like, jungle-like theme, similar to what you would find in an Indiana Jones movie, or perhaps even in Minecraft. So as you can see, I have a lot of ivy running up the walls, as well as a bunch of other rocks and ferns that are laying across the ground of the scene. And all of them are in this neat little collection called flora, or, plants. But see, the thing is like, if I were to take away this flora, you can see that the scene itself looks kind of empty. Not only that, you can also see that a lot of the patterns in the wall here are actually pretty similar, and that they're just repeating textures over and over again. The same goes for the back wall here. So as you can see, like without any plants in the scene at all, or any rocks or anything like that, the scene looks kind of empty and a little boring to look at. However, if we bring back the plants that we have earlier, you can see that it not only fills up the scene a little more, but it also breaks up the textures a little bit to make sure that the reader or the audience doesn't see the repetition as much. So as you can see here, there's a lot of things going on in the scene, and that makes it good to look at. It's a little messy, I know, but it also elevates the entire look of the scene. Now, there are two places where I get my assets from, and I feel like these are two of the best places that you can get them. The first one is Botanic, which I spoke about in my previous two videos, which is about where you can find good Blender add-ons, and Botanic is one of them. Unfortunately, the lowest tier version is no longer free. It comes in at $2 now, but I still think it's worth it to pick up, even if it only gives you around 4% of the assets that you need. So the second one where I got it from is a place known as the Plant Library, and these were created by the same people who made Geoscatter and Biome Render, if you know those add-ons. And I can actually show you right now how this one works. So for this one, it automatically imports into your user library, your asset library here in Blender. So as you can see, there's a lot of different assets, and under user library and plant library here, we have all these different plants that you can just drag and drop into the scene, as well as some textures, although I don't really use them as much because I'd rather get my textures from elsewhere. But as you can see, this was all free, and it gives you a lot more options as opposed to Botanic, and it's completely free as well. So I think that this is another great option for your vegetation. So it's as easy as importing it into your Blender file, and then just picking the one you like this, and just dragging and dropping it into the scene and scaling it as large as you would like, just like that. But now let's see here. We can take away the plant library, and we can take away the Botanic assets. And as you can see, that I still have my ivy coming up the walls here, and the ivy is not from the plant library, and it's not from Botanic either. It's actually from another add-on called Bagapie. Now, Bagapie isn't strictly a vegetation add-on. In fact, it adds a lot of different things and a lot of different assets that you can import. But what it really does is that it adds in a lot of different meshes that are actually geometry nodes. So if you see this ivy wall here, this is actually fully geometry nodes. So as you can see here under this Bagapie window. So if I click the ivy here and we go into modifiers, you can see that it has a lot of different sliders that you can play around with in order to change the look of the ivy, such as the height, the radius, the scale of the ivy to make things really overgrown, the density, random position, etc., etc. So now adding these into the scene is actually really simple, and I'm going to demonstrate that one for you now. So let's talk about the ivy, because this one I think is the most important. Let's just add in a cube here, And let's just drag it out like this. All right, now that you have a cube like this, you're going to press J on your keyboard, which is going to bring up your Bag of Pie menu, or the pie menu for Bag of Pie. And you have a new option here called Ivy. And as you can see, there's so many other options that you can go look at my video, my previous 2 videos, in order to take a look at what all of these actually do. But today we're going to be focusing more on the Ivy scattering. So if we click Ivy here, you can see that it adds in an empty into our scene. Right over here. So now if we bring the empty closer to our cube, you can see that it's starting to generate some ivy on it, but it's still really, really small. So what we're going to do is we're going to press S to scale up, something like this. And we can click the ivy and we can increase the ivy density to something like 500 or maybe even more. We can multiply that by 2. So 1,000. You can increase the scale of the ivy by a little bit, increase the resolution as well to make it a little more dense. So as you can see there, it's that easy in order to add the ivy into your scene. And if we go into render view here, you can see that it looks amazing. It comes fully textured out of the add-on, so you don't have to do anything more but press J and add your ivy, and it will automatically hook onto whatever object that you clicked on first. So let's just get rid of that there. So we get back with our original scene, and let's bring in the other 2 flora. Okay, so now you know where to get these assets. Your next question could be, how are you making them look good? How are you placing them in your scene? And what other techniques you can do in order to make them look good? So I'm going to help you out here. And the biggest tip, I think, is to look at reference photos. Reference photos of real life ruins, real life jungle, real life forests are the best representation of how vegetation should look like in real life, right? For example, here we have ivy on the walls. This is something that almost everybody knows, is that if you have an old wall like this, ivy or the ivy plant is they typically kind of grow up and crawl on the walls like this all the way until the top, stacking on top of each other and rooting in the different cracks and crevices in the stone, right? But like, what about something like a fern, right? A fern can grow on the wall, it can grow on the ground as well. So wherever you place it doesn't really matter. However, it's not known to grow like a snake up the wall. It's not known to stack on top of each other either. So yeah, looking at reference photos is the best way, and I cannot stress this enough, the best way to figure out how to put the vegetation around your scene and how to scatter them around. So let's go back to our scene in specific here. I've created something like a jungle mossy like vibe here. So I wanted a lot of plants that kind of reflected that. Ivy usually exists in places that are derelict, rundown, forgotten, or abandoned. So I tried to use that to make my scene look better. The next thing is that ferns usually tend to grow out of the ground or out of the walls, which I've done here and here. And they do also typically grow in places that are more tropical in nature, which is kind of what I was trying to achieve with my scene here. Next, I also placed or scattered some rocks around here. That doesn't really matter too much. That's also just to kind of break up the floor and kind of add more interesting like shapes for the viewer to see. And finally, of course, you have grass and weeds. So grass and weeds are something that commonly pop out of the ground anyway. They grow in cracks, crevices, in soil, and in stressful environments. So they can grow pretty much anywhere. And they're also pests. Weeds are pests, and they also typically grow in places that have been abandoned. So knowing all of this information, we can place the plants in our scene a little better and be a little bit more informed on how we're going to create the scene that looks as if it's been run over or been taken over by plants completely. So, and I'll give an example here, actually. So let's just take one of these plants that we like. Let's pick like this forest ferns. Let's pick another fern. Let's pick fern B, this one, right? So we know these kind of ferns are around in the jungle. They can grow on the floor, they can grow on the walls, and I'm going to put this one off to the side here and make it tilt over like that. So now it kind of fills in that area in the back, and I'm going to move it off to the right there. So that's step number one, is to kind of identify what vegetation looks like in real life and how you can place it around. The second thing is what makes your scene look good. You know, at the end of the day, you're making a 3D render, you're making an environmental scene. The most important thing is, you know, where can I place these different elements in order to make my scene look better, right? So I'll give you a quick example as well. Most of my flora is kind of towards the edges of my scene, as you can see here, and here off to the left, because I wanted to keep the middle a little bit empty to kind of give space for these blocks to take center stage, right? But at the same time, I also don't want to block the view of the blocks, and I don't want to take too much attention away from them. So I'm placing the vegetation more off towards the side, right? So let's take the fern that we got from earlier, and let's say that we wanted to add it back into the scene, but we choose a bad placement, right? Let's imagine if you had the fern like top, like middle, right in front of the camera. Like, this is pretty bad, right? Because all you can see is the silhouette of the fern. You don't really get to see the blocks. You don't get to see the environment. You don't get to see the walls or anything. It's just completely blocking the camera. But at the same time, if we move it somewhere like here, right under the blocks, and we scale it up, right? Now it's just like taking over the block completely. It's taking too much attention away from them. It doesn't make sense proportionality wise, placement wise. Why is it growing directly into the blocks? Why is it growing in the middle of the forest floor without any walls to support it or any other vegetation around it? These are all small things that you guys should really think about when you're creating a scene like this, just to make sure that your scene makes sense and that it'll look good in the end. So again, let's just take this, let's scale it down a little bit. I would put this somewhere more off to the side, something like that, and create a more busy background that people can look at. Now, when they see this, they can be like, oh yeah, this is a ruin or a jungle temple or anything like that if you play Minecraft that has been kind of run down and just has plants growing out from the side, while the forest floor is relatively clear because of the existence of these blocks for whatever reason. So again, these are like things that you should definitely be thinking about when you're placing vegetation around your scene. So yeah, and that kind of basically concludes it for how you can use vegetation in your scene. I think that this is completely underrated. When I started off in environmental renders, I refused to use like vegetation assets or assets from other people because I thought I could model everything. But I know now that that's untrue. And in fact, that it is good to be able to kind of place your place assets around the scene in order to make it look more noisy, more busy, more realistic even, right? Especially playing around with things like geometry nodes. So definitely like try this out in your next environmental render. Take the plant library and take botanic and kind of just scatter all those different plants around your scene to kind of bring them to life, give some color, and also maybe make your scene a little bit more realistic. Thank you everybody again for watching up to this point. I really hope that you learned something from this video and you can apply it to your renders sometime in the future. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you go down into the description box and click that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and we're so close to 500 subscribers, and I know we can reach there with all of your guys' help and support. For those of you who already have subscribed, thank you so much for returning and watching a new video. Your support means the world to me. And make sure you click the like button down there in the description box as well in order to push this video out to more people so they can see it. Thank you once again everybody for watching, and I hope to see you next week. However, if you're not done watching Blender content yet, perhaps you would like to click the video in the middle of your screen in order to see the top 5 Blender add-ons that the pros use in order to create their renders. Goodbye!